Hey, everybody. Thank you again for joining Hackfort 2021. It really has been a long wait for us to be back on the stage, so I'm super happy to be here. I'm also really happy to present our next presenter here. Dan's a really good friend of mine. I remember when we first met, and he's like, "Oh, it's like I work in a company. It's like Pandora for books." And I was like, "What?" Long story, but anyways, Dan, thank you so much for joining, and yeah, let's have some fun. I also have a microphone for some Q&A when Dan's ready for that. We can pass that around. I have a couple volunteers that can help with that. So, thanks, Dan. Have some fun.
Thank you, Sean. I want to thank Sean, Hackfort, City of Boise. Yeah, thank you for this. I'm excited to talk about this. I talk about some of these stories every once in a while with my friends, but it was interesting to sit down and kind of put it all together. I'm going to talk a little bit about what it's been like. I mean, I would say I've been a data scientist for 13 or 14 years now. And talk about what it's been to grow up through data science becoming something. Because at the time, there wasn't an. I mean, there was a time when we didn't know what to call. I didn't have a title because I didn't know what to call what I was doing. But I'm happy to be here. We'll also talk about a little bit of how I use data science to become a professional athlete. I hope that'll be interesting. And I've also started a new venture that I'll talk a little bit about. Largely, though, my connection to Boise is I came here in 2009 to work with a startup company called Booklamp. And like Sean said, it was like a Pandora for books. It's just the easiest way to put it. We ended up kind of developing different machine learning algorithms, and we were acquired by iTunes in 2014. So, but we'll get to that, and we'll start at the beginning. So I worked at a insurance company while I was in grad school, and I was studying applied economics in grad school. And I also want to say, too, I'm not going to get too much into any technical details, but if you guys have questions about, I don't know, data science, I'll talk a little bit about it, but I didn't figure to get too deep into that stuff. But I'm glad to talk about it if you want. So I worked at this insurance company. I was in grad school studying applied economics at Florida State University, and I had been working at this insurance company since 2003. My mom was there, and she kind of got me the job and just stuck around. So one day they came to me, and they handed me a spreadsheet. And they said it was a bunch of loss data for one of the sheriff's offices in Florida. So this company handles all of the, I guess, property casualty insurance for the sheriff's offices in Florida. So all the pit maneuvers you see, like all the vehicles getting blown to pieces, whatever, that's all covered by Hunt Insurance Group. And I worked for these people in their claims department, and they come and hand me this spreadsheet with loss data, and they say, this sheriff is not happy about the price that he's paying for the premium and the deductible that they're paying for this. Now, usually this is something an actuary would do, which gets paid way more than my intern self at this insurance group. But I think what happened is the higher ups just saw this as like a thorn in their side, and they're like, let's just give it to Dan, see what he can do. And so I ended up coming back. Let me see. It took me a while to remember this. I ended up coming back with a spreadsheet, and what I ended up doing was so they had premium and deductible is what the plan is based on. And I just took the loss data and created a chart that had premium on one side, deductibles on the x-axis, x and y-axis. And one of those was what they were actually paying. And what I ended up doing was I developed an analysis that said, like, you could offer them these other ones, and your result would be exactly the same or better. And so they're like, wow, this is great. Okay, and so they go and offer these people these different plans, and that ended up getting me in front of their corporate office, who at the time was, they wanted to make sure I wasn't going anywhere. But right at that time, I actually started talking to this company in Boise, Idaho called Booklamp. So I told them I wasn't, but that was my cue that I needed to talk to my manager and say, hey, I might be taking off. But this is my first. That was my first. When I think back to, like, what I consider data science, this is probably the first foray I had into what I would call it. I mean, then it was just being good at Excel, I guess. So yeah, let's go to. So yeah, I ended up finding Booklamp, but the way I did that is while I was studying applied economics in college, I ran into this course called econometrics. Anybody heard of econometrics? Econometrics, maybe? Okay, well, all it is it's using statistics to study economic theory, using statistical tools to study economic theory. And in fact, and this is before data science and whatnot, this is still important in data science like realms. Nowadays we have a lot more solidified sort of fields of data science, but what this class showed me is that I realized that, like, hey, I don't have to just use economic data. Like, these tools can be used with any data that has a certain meaning. So as long as you know that that data is good, and you understand the inferences that these tools can make, then you can start to use these tools with that data to come up with various generalizations. So what I ended up doing, I was big into music at the time. I was in a rock band all through college, so not in grad school. I didn't have time for that. But I was big into music, and I had been researching Pandora and the sort of data that they were collecting. So I know we all know Pandora. Do you guys know kind of how it works at all? Anybody? Yeah.
Yeah, I was a subscriber several years ago.
What's that?
I was a subscriber several years back.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So Pandora, the way that it works is they have a lot of experts, and they build tools for these experts to analyze and tag different aspects of music. And I remember when I was looking through some of this stuff you could find online about what kind of things they were measuring, and they would measure things like different kinds of rap. Was it a female vocalist? Time signatures, all the obvious ones. But then there were these kind of like almost subjective ones. But they had music experts creating this data, and that's what they were using that was their proposal with Pandora Radio, was that, hey, if we just have data on all these songs, you tell us what you like, and we'll find we'll find other songs that has similar data, basically. And I'd been trying to contact these guys through grad school because I wanted to use their data for my thesis, and I just could not get through to them. Their COO sent me some stuff that was, I think, about signal processing, which I didn't know really anything about at the time. And ultimately I ended up talking to a receptionist who was, I remember she was like, look, if it's analysis, we already do it. And I was like, come on now. So that kind of ended my possibilities with Pandora. But in researching that, I ended up finding Booklamp. And I want to say, so I was researching Pandora, and Booklamp at the time had just launched a demo. This is probably like April 2008. And they were calling themselves a Pandora for books. So what I did, once I found them, I had just written an email to Pandora. I copy and pasted that, replaced every instance of the word music with books, and I told them exactly what I did. I said, I copy and pasted this from sending it to Pandora. and it just fits what you guys are doing. Like we should talk. And so I talked to Aaron, the CEO, I guess within a week. And then within a week of talking to him, I flew out here to Boise to kind of I guess it was kind of an interview, but we were all on the same page. Didn't feel like an interview. And I ended up working for them my last year of grad school and did my master's thesis with their data. At the time, what they were doing was, we'd call it like writing style. So you just if you think of text and you think of all the things you could just count, like they were just counting all of the things. So how long were words? How many words were in sentences? How long were paragraphs? How many adjectives were being used? Verbs, nouns, all the different things. We even measured Klingon words. He was a big sci-fi guy. I mean, it didn't mean anything. But I think it was like, it looked for words that had multiple commas with multiple characters between the commas, something like that. But anyways, I ended up working for Booklamp, and that found my way out to. So I did my last year of grad school, and once I graduated, I think it was August 24th I graduated, and I showed up in Boise August 31st, 2009, and I started working full-time. I lived off of Allenbaugh. Is that a street? Yeah, Allenbaugh. I lived off of Allenbaugh and commuted into town every day. Anybody know the water cooler apartments? They're on like 14th in Idaho. So that used to be a really kind of run-down barn-like building, and it was called the water cooler, and it was a business incubator, and that's where we built everything. And we were in there with a couple other businesses, but it was a really fun time in my life, and I met a lot of these guys. Some of these guys that are out here, like Sean I met probably immediately. It's hard not to meet Sean. Yeah, so I came out to Boise in 2009 and stuck around until 2014. We'll talk about Booklamp a little bit. I actually can't see it on mine. Let's see, writing style. Yeah. So this was one of my first business cards, and we all had one of these. And the way Aaron would sell what we were doing, because at the time we were just looking at writing style, like counting all these things that were happening in text. And so this business card is showing, or this graph is showing two of our writing style metrics, pacing and density. And each of these are linear combinations of these counts, and then indexed between 0 and 100. Pacing and density tend to be relatively correlated, but you can think of pacing as like being how much of a page turner that a book could be. And density was sort of like, how thick is this to read? So you can kind of see how they'd be correlated. Obviously, if something's really dense, it's probably not going to be as much a page turner. But they're not the same thing. So the argument that he'd always make is with Jurassic Park. And you can see here between the blue and the red, when pacing and density, when they have their biggest, like density drops, pacing goes up when all of the dinosaurs like leave their cages. And then the story becomes exciting. And so the way he'd tell this is like, you want to stick around, knowing this kind of information, you want to stick around through the first bit of the book, get to this part so that you can enjoy the rest of the book. Obviously Jurassic Park, you don't have to tell that to people, but for other books, so you imagine we could index these sorts of metrics across all sorts of books. And we did have a consumer-facing product, like consumer-facing service. But really, the way we ended up going about things is we took these kind of metrics to publishers, so that they could potentially find the next Michael Crichton or Stephen King. So that was another argument that we made, is like, so in publishing, it's really hard to find good writers. A lot of times you just need a writer that has done it before, and then you get them and you have them make a book and you sell it, and people will buy it because they know the writer. So our argument was, well, there's a lot of other people that write like Stephen King. You just don't know who they are. And we were pushing the fact that we could use data to help publishers find these people. What was interesting is publishers had a hard time figuring out what to do with us, because they're notoriously not very tech oriented. So they ended up getting us a Random House ended up giving us a office in their building in New York City. So we could like go work there, but I think that was their way of being like, we're not really sure what to do, but like, come over here. Just because, I don't know, you're doing something that's interesting, but we have to figure out how to use it. Let's see here. So this, the mayor of Boise, that's that picture on the left there. I'm in the middle, quite out of shape. Not a professional athlete right there. Honestly, I can't remember the name of the mayor. Mayor. What is it? Beater? Okay, Mayor Beater. He just swung by for a minute and said hi, and we took this photo. And the top right image there was from one of our initial websites. Initially, the way that Aaron wanted our website to work, and this was our customer-facing website, is sort of like Google, how Google changed their logo every day or during certain occasions. So Aaron was big into design and all this sort of stuff, and he really wanted to like change up the logo all the time. And being kind of an engineer mind, I was just like, whatever, okay. I just want to do the data stuff and make the engine work right. So, and that's why we had the Book Genome Project. So we called it the Book Genome Project because Pandora had its Music Genome Project, and we were just kind of like lining it up with that so people could understand what we were doing. Book Genome Project. So Book Genome Project actually was, when Booklamp started, it was all about writing style, like counting all the things, like I said. Book Genome Project is, we learned of a technology called latent Dirichlet allocation, or it's topic modeling. It's very well developed now, but effectively what it does is it measures collocations of words. So you could think about it as keywords, but it's like if you're looking for the word blood as a keyword, well, that can show up in a lot of different contexts. So if you're just looking for blood, you're going to get a lot of things that are just like, here's the word blood. But blood can show up in vampire books, which the words that it shows up around are going to be different than if it shows up in a murder novel or in a hospital setting. And what topic modeling allows you to do is differentiate those things. And effectively, it makes it so you can just sort of automatically label books with what they're about. So it would take about a minute. You could give us any book, take about a minute, and we could pretty much tell you what it was about. Also with characters and all sorts of other things that we were measuring. But Book Genome Project a lot of it was topic modeling. At least that's what I was working on. So let's see. So this is Aaron and myself. We visited New York at one point. Just thought it was some cool pictures. Figured to put some pictures in here from back in the day. And let's see here. So in 2014 then, we ended up, let's see, Cupertino. All right. In 2014, we ended up making a service for Apple. So we were talking to Apple, and they were having this problem. They had young adult fiction, and the way that genres work in just bookstores in general is the author just puts their what genre they think it is. but there's some moral hazard in this because let's say you write an erotica novel, right? Well, if you put erotica on that, it'll sell a certain way. But if you can put romance on it and get it into the romance shelf, it's going to sell better. So this happens with a lot of different genres. And we were able to use our technology to do a couple of things, but one of them was we could suggest genres that books would be about. So automatically we could tell them, hey, these are probably these genres. But what they needed was they had young adult fiction books, something like 4,000 books coming in a day, or I don't know what the number was. It was a huge number. And their issue is they didn't want like a teenager downloading this book that might have porn in it, and now they have to go talk to, they're like, you can imagine the conversation they'd have with their parents, and their parents get all upset with Apple. So Apple avoid this, and they had 30 or so plus people just kind of Command F and looking at like covers and stuff. I mean, it sounds ridiculous, right? But that's where things were, and so we came to them, or I guess we came together to come up with a service that we used our Book Genome Project, which a number of the topics that it creates were romance / erotica. There's some I can't say any of the words in the topic because it's just not polite company. But we were able to create an illicit content detector. And so you could just feed, we took that 30-person team, and I think we reduced it to like 2. And the way that it worked is they'd feed a book through our system, take about a minute, and we'd say we'd measure these topics throughout the course of the book, and we'd just highlight where we think porn is. And because we didn't want to decide, we had no interest in being like, this is not, you shouldn't put this on your store. That's not our decision. But we wanted to give them information. And so I should have added an image of it, but it was basically like a timeline of the book, and then it'd be like, shoop, and then they could just, they could click there, read it, and decide for themselves. So it saved them from, they had to somehow process the whole book of all thousands of books coming through each week or day or whatever it was, and figure out if it had porn in it. And we were like, well, we can just make a little tool that'll do that. So that was our first talk with Apple, and then then they invited us out to Cupertino, and we went and visited and talked about some of the work we were doing. And let's see. And in 2014, they acquired us. iTunes Engineering did, and they incorporated our work. Some other stuff I did with BookLamp was recommendation algorithms. So the Book Genome Project created data, and then I worked with that data to figure out ways to recommend books to people. And Apple ended up incorporating this into their Apple Books product. I used to have a thing. There used to be a thing in Apple Books I could point to, but it's not there anymore. Two of our employees from BookLamp are still there, and one of them let me know that is like, yeah, it's all just like kind of baked into everything now. And apparently they're using some of our techniques more broadly with all sorts of apps and movies and all sorts of things like that, which makes sense. I mean, to me it makes sense because I've been thinking about it for a long time, but it's cool to hear that like these things are becoming evident. So hopefully all the recommendations you guys are getting from Apple are good. I mean, we did a piece of it. We didn't do a lot of it, but yeah. And so I spent 3 years at iTunes working as a data scientist. Well, I started as a software engineer, but that didn't really work out too well. Like my first task as a software engineer was to learn Java. So I learned some Java, and then I switched roles. I'm better with Java today, but I ended up switching so I started on a recommendations and algorithms team, which made sense because that's what I did for BookLamp. And then I switched to A/B testing and evaluations, which was a brand new team. What was interesting about my experience going to iTunes is I'd been doing all this stuff here in Boise, and I was like, oh, I'll finally get to go work with other people that do all these things. And I get there, and effectively, data science-wise, they were looking at me to be like, well, what are we going to do? and I honestly, I mean, I think now if I went and did something like that, I could probably help. But at the time, I was not prepared for that. And I did the best I could to help them with what they were doing. And I learned a lot. Helped launch Apple Music. I don't know if there's still a For You tab in Apple Music, but one of the issues we had with launching Apple Music is we had to understand how Apple users would react to the recommendations that we had. But we didn't have any user data from people listening to a streaming service with Apple. And so we had to, Apple does some of the techniques they used were pretty wild. So for example, they do things like, it's like, well, we know what these people like to listen to. And we know that these people are like these people based on app purchases. And so we'll infer that these people also like to listen to these things, and then we'll run an analysis based on that. And those sorts of, I mean, it kind of felt a little Wild Westy, but they were all trying to figure it out too. So yeah, I also managed the integration of Booklamps technology at iTunes Engineering, which a bit of a moral hazard, because I made the algorithm and they're like, okay, well now you have to evaluate it. It's like, okay, well, I think it's great. But I tried to be as unbiased as possible. I tried to use my economics training to be unbiased in the experimental design, and we developed A/B tests to push that out. It used to be called More Books Like This, MBLT, yeah. And on every product page at the bottom would be this, what they called a swoosh, and it's just a swoosh of books that were like that book, and it was based on Booklamps data and the algorithms that I wrote around that data, and it was really, really cool to see that. Fortunately, I can't point to it anymore, but it's in there somewhere. Let's see what else I got. Apple Music. Yeah, so I helped with the Apple Music launch, talked about that a little bit. That was really cool. Once that launched, we ended up bringing some other people on the data science team, and I was given the opportunity to choose what I wanted to work on, and so I wanted to work on Apple Music, which was a bit ironic because in the past I was trying to work for Pandora, and so now I saw it. I kind of felt a little bit of a chip on my shoulder. I was like, well, let's kick these guys' ass, But yeah, worked on Apple Music some. That was a lot of fun. Drake was a big problem actually for us because he's in everybody's library, and so it's like you have to. So when we were going to sort of make these generalizations, we had to make concession for the fact that Drake is everywhere. So everything is kind of connected to Drake, and you have to it's sort of like one of those outlier things. You just need to take him out of the data set and then run your analysis. I'm sure they're having similar problems, but let's see. Oh, an interesting data science problem while we were there is a lot of times in A/B testing, I think when it comes to product testing like this, getting enough sample size can be an issue. And you can do stuff to finagle with that. Well, Apple had a different issue. They had the samples were way too large, which you wouldn't think is a problem, but when you start doing things like difference in means tests. Oh yeah, whoops. When you start doing things like difference in means tests and the sort of statistical tests that you do to measure if a change in an algorithm change the way people are listening to things, then if you have too large a sample, then it's going to lead to every change being significant. So you somehow have to come up with a way where, is that, anybody study statistics in here? Anybody stats? Yeah, a little bit? You understand what I'm saying a little bit? Yeah. Yeah, so like the sort of range and error like gets so small that just a little bit of change is going to be like, oh, well, that's statistically significant. Let's push it to production. But that's not necessarily right. And I left kind of as they were starting to solve those situations. I guess if I were to solve it, I'd like sample from the full sample or something like that. I'm not sure what I'd do. Let's see. Oh yeah, and then I left Apple in 2017. To be honest, I was just burnt out, and I just wanted to go and focus on myself and just get fit and healthy. And I've been an athlete my whole life, so just sitting behind a desk all the time, it was a very demanding job, and trying to keep the rest of my life in order was just difficult. So I left and I went to Tallahassee, and I coached, I don't have a slide for this, but I coached high school athletics for a year. I got state runner-up as an assistant coach on our soccer team, which on the same soccer team, I got state runner-up as a player. But so that was a little bitter, I guess. But it was a great experience, and I coached track and cross country, got fit, and then that summer I started kicking footballs, which I'll talk about in a second. So I started kicking footballs, but I also realized I should probably go get a job again. I needed to go get a job again, let me put it that way. And so I went and worked at LexisNexis. A friend of mine from iTunes was a manager there, and he helped get me in there. And I ended up working with, I don't have a lot to say about LexisNexis, but I ended up doing similar things, A/B testing, helping them instrument their different products so that we could observe what users are doing and test new search algorithms that we think would work better. And so I did that for about 13 months. It was a good experience. All the teams I supported were in Europe, so by about lunchtime, I didn't have to talk to them. No, they were nice people, but I also got to go over there. They sent me over to Amsterdam, which is, I think, LexisNexis's kind of home, cultural home, historical home, I don't know. But that was great. Got to go over there and to London, to our London office, and I used that time to go to Dublin for myself. I think had I stuck around, it would have been good, but I saw myself getting into the same sort of rut of, it's just demanding to do these kinds of things for big corporate companies. So I'm going to talk about the venture that I'm getting into next. But we'll talk about football first. So I figured when I started kicking, I found a coach. And it's one thing to just go out and, if you're a good kicker and whatnot, but nobody's going to care unless there's somebody that's been in the industry and has, can kind of like market you around. So I found a coach initially just to sort of learn what to do. I played soccer for 16 years of my life. 16, yeah, something like that. Ended on a knee surgery. I've had like 4 knee surgeries since. But I was like, I can just kick. I'll just go out and kick. That's not going to hurt my knee. And so I started kicking, and I thought to myself, like, okay, that's fine. I can go out and kick, but I don't really know how I'm doing. So I came up with a system for measuring what I was doing so that at least I could understand what I would expect of myself. Because otherwise it's just, and this is how most kickers are, it's just kind of like you just think you're good, and then you go out and you kick and maybe you make it, So I came up with this way of measuring things. This is one of the charts I'd made, and actually I had a Instagram account I used where I put all these up because I don't have any background. So I was like, well, let me just put all this stuff up on Instagram, and if any coach is interested, I'll send them the information I have. And so I experimented with a lot of ways to do this. Ultimately, the only data I really took was makes and misses, just to understand my percentages. Let's see. So I'll talk about a little. So maybe this is a little too much for just kicking, but the theory I had here was that accuracy is inversely proportional to distance, which is just to say that the further you go back, all else equal, your accuracy is going to go down. That's just, I mean, that just seems like a truth to me. And I ended up seeing that, which I'll show a graph here in a second. And the way I measured these things, I didn't have uprights to kick at. I kicked at a light post. And so the goal was to hit the light post. Just this skinny, like 1 foot wide thing. And because I didn't know where the uprights were, I just had to guess. And that's why, so green is saying that it was a make. Red, I know it was a miss. Yellow, I don't know, it's kind of close. And so what I'd end up is with two different measurements of how I thought I did that day. So I'd do a range, which is the 86 to 93%. And so over time, in 2019, I was signed by the Tucson Sugar Skulls of the Indoor Football League. I live in Tucson now, and that's why. And so I was like, okay, well, I'm going to track all of my sessions up to the season. And so in late 2019, I tracked about 28 different sessions in this way, and I was able to plot them. And so the greens are all the maximum make percentage. So that was like my green plus the yellow makes, the yellows. And then the blue here was my minimum make percentage. So that was just the greens. So I was saying the yellows were misses. So I plotted this all on a graph, and I made these regression lines that allowed me to just kind of get an idea of what I could expect, in a range, what I might expect from every distance that I'd kick. Now, kicking is not just a kicker. So, anybody heard the term omitted variable bias? Anybody know what that is? You know what that is? A little bit? If I told you that there is a snapper and a holder that have to do stuff here, and I'm just measuring, so I'm measuring this from me just being out kicking by myself. So you can think of, so omitted variable bias is saying that it's like, okay, that's a nice analysis you have, but you left out this thing that could be affecting the results. And so it's important to take like this kind of information and say like, well, look, there's no snapper, there's no holder, there's no crowd, all that stuff is not being taken into account here. So this is like in a vacuum how I might expect to do. Snapping and holding can be a big piece of it. So anyways, use data science. It got me, I think what this did is it gave me confidence, because this isn't really, it's not too data sciencey. Really, when I think of what data science is just kind of fancy averages. Machine learning, AI, it's all just kind of fancy averages. You got this fancy average. LDA, the topic I always talk about, fancy averages. These aren't too fancy averages. But if I were going to do fancy averages, it might be something like I'm measuring this stuff, but then I make this kind of change, and I measure that, and then I do some kind of difference test to see if it actually helped me. But I didn't have time to do that, so I had a job. So yeah, I got signed by Tucson and showed up, drove to Tucson got in there February 25th, 2020, ready to kick some footballs. And we got through preseason camp, which started March 3rd, and our first game was going to be March 19th, and then it just all shut down. So go to this. So I ended up playing. This next in 2021, this past season, which just ended. Actually, this photo of me on the left is from one of my first games ever as a football. I didn't play football ever until I played for this team called the Cape Fear Heroes in Fayetteville, North Carolina, and I did well enough. I did well enough that we were able to use that film to get me up to the IFL. Anybody heard of indoor football? Anybody seen it? Arena football, AFL, Arena Football League. So the Arena Football League used to be the top guys. They got sued by an insurance company and they folded, which is really sad, to be honest. Anybody know who Kurt Warner is? I think I'm that old now. So I won't tell that story, but so yeah, indoor football. I won't go into the details, but it's played on effectively a hockey rink, and the uprights for kicking are half the width of the NFL. So very skinny uprights. To give some idea, a PAT, an extra point, an indoor, is an 18-yard field goal. But because of how skinny the uprights are, if you were to find the equivalent angle to the uprights from the ball for NFL uprights, it would be something like a 37-yard field goal. So if you imagine you get back to 50 yards, you're talking about, to get an equivalent angle to NFL uprights, you're talking about 100+ yard field goal. Apart from the fact that nobody can kick it 100 yards, but that's the angle that you're looking at. These are very skinny uprights, and you might be able to see it. Let's see.
We'll see as Daniel Bowen, the former Sugar Skull, kicked on this field just a few weeks ago in a Sugar Skulls uniform, and now he's kicking for the Gladiators of Duke City.
I got released and then picked up by.
It's about 37-yarder, I think, if I got my math right. 36 or 37.
You're right.
So you can see the uprights. They come through.
Bowen, the kick, plenty of leg, and that was.
Oh, it's right up the gut.
You can kind of see them. You might be able to see them. They're pretty tiny. Let's see. Yeah, so, they're only 9 feet wide. So we're talking less than this, less than how wide that is. Going to do the other one?
And Daniel Bowen about to send it down
this
to the other end.
This is before I got released.
There's the boot.
Perfect kick.
Kovalu cuts to his right, tripped up. Nice job by the Sugar Skulls T.T. Barber.
That was an excellent kick by Bowen. He put it right back in the back corner.
All right, so football. So I ended up walking away from the season because it's very stressful. I think as a kicker too, because you're not a linebacker. You're not out there smashing people every play. You're just kind of hanging out. And then when it's your time, you're like, all right, I got to go do the thing. Where everyone else is huffing and puffing and working so hard. So it's a very different experience for me. I'd always been a soccer player. I was usually one of the better players, and I was, in what was happening. And being a kicker is you're just playing a different game than everybody else out there. So I ended up learning about that. I learned a lot from that season. But I walked away because I had work to do with my new venture, AMI, Applied Machine Intelligence. And I'm working to implement a lot of the technologies that we used back with Booklamp. And I want to apply them to more than just books. I want to apply them to documents of all sorts and just help people triage or make sense of large swaths of documents. So I think of legal firms. I incorporated this in April, so still I'm working on the building out the technology, but I'm probably looking at things like legal firms, audit firms, anybody who's taking in lots of documents that need to be processed quickly so they can get on with their work. Governments. So let's see here. Yeah, data science at AMI. Well, it's just me, and part of why I started this is I just like doing all this I love doing this sort of work. I loved it when I was with Booklamp, and I'll confess a little bit. The last year and a half I was with Booklamp, I was kind of a butt because they were doing stuff. They were moving in directions that I was like, well, no, I'm gonna work on this stuff. Like, I'm gonna keep working on this stuff. And it turned out they ended up, I think, not firing me because I had made the recommendation. I had just put so much into it that if they were going to sell the company, like, I had to be around. At least that's my understanding. So now I've come to the conclusion that, like, I'm just going to do this work and find people that need these sorts of technologies. So yeah, I hooked up with an old Booklamp friend of mine. I think I'm running out of time, actually. 5 minutes? Okay. Yeah, there's not too much to talk about with AMI. If you guys are interested, if anybody here is interested in that, the sort of work that I've talked about with Booklamp, text analytics, data science, feel free to talk to me. I should have put a contact thing so people could find me. Well, you can find me at danpatrickbowen at gmail.com, and also at Dan P. Bowen on Twitter. And if you want to see my kicking, I'm Kicker Unknown on Instagram. That doesn't have any data science. So, yeah, if there's any questions or...
Anyone have any questions for Dan? Big round of applause. Thank you, Dan.
All right, thank y'all.
Any questions, though? We have a few minutes. Anyone? Any takers? Molly over here. No, I'll do it on the mic so people can hear on the recording.
I have lots of thoughts, but mainly, as we were talking about kind of before you started, in this age of misinformation,
Yeah.
what do you see as your technology's capacity to minimize that without going into censorship?
I think, do you say without going into censorship because of what I was talking about with, like, filtering? Yeah, I guess the way that I could see this helping that sort of thing, I mean, I can only think of it as, like, I could be some kind of news aggregator. I could create some kind of news aggregator that allows people to understand sort of the distribution of what's being pushed their way. And so, like, there might be all these other stories that you might be interested in, but you don't see it because you're just bombarded with whatever they say you should be reading that day, you know? So practically, that's what I think I could do. But my pipe dream is, like I was talking about earlier, is I'd like to be able to sort of do something about emotive conjugation, which I'll just, for the recording, I'll say it's the difference between saying, I've reconsidered my position and you've gone back on your word. It's the same thing, but because of the way that I put it, I'm the authority here, and you're kind of a butthead because you changed your mind. Like, why did you do that? It's like, I've reconsidered my position, though. So you can use words like that. It's called emotive conjugation, Russell conjugation, and I'd love to find ways to strip that ability from writers. Or they can do it, but I want to expose it. Like, you need to expose it. I see it all the time now when I read. But I think a lot of people, I think it's not uncommon, let me put it that way, that people will just kind of take in what they're reading as is. But there's a lot to trying to solve that. There's a lot of things not sure exactly how to do, so. All right.
I think we have one more over here.
Okay, yeah.
I think we have two, actually.
What do you think about using Python as a tool for data science?
I think it's a great tool for data science. I'm fluent in R, but somebody sends me some Python, I'll figure it out and like sit down and work on it. I think it's great. Yeah, I think it opens the door for a lot of people to use to do data science, because R is great, but it's not super friendly. Python's a great Swiss Army knife for all things, and data science included. But you want to make a web server, you want to do these other things, like Python can do all those things. R can do a lot of stuff, but Python's a little more robust, I think. So, yeah.
There was a common theme that you mentioned with,
Okay.
I think, all your jobs, which was you got burnt out.
Yeah.
So I was wondering, what are you doing with are you doing anything with AMI to kind of try to prevent that in the way you...
So when I left, I'll be quick about this. When I left Apple, part of what I was trying to do also was it just gave me space to like figure out how to do life better. And in that space, I've come up with ways to just manage the commitments I have. I mean, frankly, I found getting things done. You know, GTD. Anybody know GTD? Yeah. So I found that I've implemented those things, and like I've just built all sorts of systems around that and just streamlined my life. So I think what that's given me, if I were to go back, is it's given me it'll give me more awareness of all the things that I have going on. So if somebody's like, hey, we need you to do this, I have more capacity and I can point to things and say, I can't. I have all this other stuff, where before I was just running it all in my head, and that's a recipe for like getting burnt out, I think. So I'm just more organized, I think, now. Yeah.
Dan, thank you so much. Let's
Thank
give another
you.
round of applause. And please do, if you have more questions for Dan, go bother him. He's got a lot of great knowledge, and he's also just a fun guy. Thanks, buddy.